I think I'll first invite any of our panelists to make some comments if they would like to, and then we'll open it up for general questions. Mark, anything you'd like to say?
Yeah, let me just comment briefly on the future of the South Korean. My concern about the future of the U.S.-Korea alliance is whether the United States is flexible to deal with the changes that need to come about, as it looks at Korea as an equal partner. And there's been so much talk about it being unequal in various ways, and the ideas of visa and other ways will cross these final barriers, becoming a true equal partner, whereas early on it was quite unequal during the early growth years. But now it should be an equal partner. The Korean economy is much more important to the United States than is Italy, or maybe France, or certainly on par with Germany and England. And so Korea is a major player in the world, and the United States still has this patron relationship in many ways. And so the United States has to be willing to make some changes, and the cornerstone of a lot of that is the security agreement. And there's a lot of talk about revising the security agreement and where that's going to go, and I don't know the answer. I don't know where it's going to go. Certainly the divided peninsula has a lot to do with it. If in the best of worlds, if I were king, Korea would be united, and we wouldn't have to worry about all this. But I'm not king, and we can't reunite Korea. And so, but eventually, I think this is going to happen. And I think the unification with North Korea and the fall of the North Korean regime is inevitable. It's just a matter of time. Is it going to be 5 years? Is it going to be 10 years? Is it going to be 20 years? But remember, when we saw the fall of the Iron Curtain, that it was very, very quick. I mean, we had no idea that it was going to come as quickly as it did. And I think South Korea knows that. They realize that when North Korea starts to fall apart, they've done various contingency plannings for preparing for what they want to call a soft landing. So they have a gradual unification, so we don't have the chaos that they had in Germany, the economic chaos they had in Germany, for West Germany to pick up the pieces when East Germany fell apart when they united. So is the United States resilient enough to look at a more mature relationship as the times demand? And I don't know. It'll be interesting to watch. One thing that I like about Korea, there's never a dull moment. Never a dull moment in Korea.
Thanks. Gordon, any comments on the economy?
North Korea is always the sexy topic, right? We all talk about it. It deals with nukes. It deals with weird people with weird hairstyles. It deals with human rights. Those are things that really make news, whereas the real story on the Korean Peninsula, and Professor Ringer referred to this, isn't those issues. It's been this dramatic but gradual growth of the Korean economic miracle over the last 3 decades. And so it's very useful to kind of put that in perspective. I would just make kind of two broad points. Clearly, I agree with Professor Peterson that the U.S. really has to come to terms with Korea's new economic might in that regard, and that has kind of put some strain on our current bilateral political relationship and our security relationship. The failure of the U.S. to come to terms with that, and what I mean by that is that the United States, again, still very much looks at Korea in the security context, in the context of the Korean War, and the Koreans have come to resent that. They feel that they're a member of the OECD, that they are the 12th largest economy of the world, and yet they don't receive that level of treatment from the United States.
I said 11th.
Yeah, 11th largest. See, obviously, even I'm guilty of it, right? I don't give them the
sometimes 10.
The truth, the just deserves. But the problem is, of course, that in the United States' minds, while this remains preeminent, the North Korea issue grabs the interest of the policymakers, and it becomes a real struggling point between the two of them in terms of our alliance relationships in particular. And so there's actually a growing school of thought right now that think that in some respects the alliance itself is an obstacle to U.S.-Korea relations, right? That whereas for 40 years the alliance was the bedrock of the relationship, right? And now in many respects, if you look at it seriously, it's gone over where more than almost any other country in Asia, perhaps even the world, Korea has, in terms of culturally, in terms of commitment to the rule of law, in terms of commitment to democracy. I mean, they're arguably the most democratic society in Asia, even including Japan, of course, in terms of their commitment to the international trading system, in terms of their commitment to everything that we value. They're our most logical partner in the region, right? And all these things. And yet we're having these major frictions that are tied back to these historical legacy issues tied to the alliance and stuff. And so again, I think it's just very useful for us to have this economic picture put in thing. I want to throw out one issue, and it just kind of highlights to you how these things come together. In all this discussion of free trade agreements, the Mansfield Foundation hosted a speech last week in Washington, D.C. on Capitol Hill with congressional staffers. And we had Wendy Cutler, the Assistant U.S. Trade Representative for Korea and China, and we had Minister Choi Seok-young, the Economic Minister in the embassy, both talking about the Korean FTA. And as you might imagine, one of the main issues that came up had to do with North Korea, right? And because this is the issue that's grabbed a lot of congressional aides' attention. And the reason is because the South Koreans, out of a desire to get the U.S. to recognize their engagement policy to the North, want to include goods that are made in Kaesong as South Korean goods. It's a political gambit. I mean, we're talking about pots and pans here. Economically, it's a tiny thing, right? But politically, the South Korean government is trying to get that buy-in. And of course, all the anti-North Korean, and I would say in some respect anti-South Korean forces are mobilizing against this to say, you do that, no FTA. And so very early on in the debates, North Korea has once again kind of stuck its foot in what should be a very clearly economic-based discussion between the U.S. and the ROK.
That's right. I said Korea has 3 FTA so far with Chile and Singapore and EFTA. And every FTA which Korea has with other countries has that clause, which permits Kaesong product to be tariff exempted. And of course, with the USA, it's a whole different story. But at the initial stage of the negotiation, we wouldn't officially raise that issue. Of course, this is my personal perspective, but at the later stage, keeping in mind that this is a very political and symbolic item, we would be happy to talk about it with U.S. negotiators. And but at this initial stage, Congress people and Congress staffers tend to pick this issue up. But I don't think it will produce any beneficial effect for the whole business, I think.
Scott, any comments you'd like to make?
Briefly on the U.S. FTA, or I'm not going to rate it one way or the other. And working at KEI, I can't, at least publicly. I think a couple of facts stick out in my mind. I read a Goldman Sachs report a couple of weeks ago saying that Korea's economy is now the 10th or 11th largest in the world. By 2025, it may have the 3rd highest GNP per capita in the world. So while that's something I think that stuck out in my mind. 2 is that the U.S. is a trading partner of Korea, and Korea's larger scale of things, it's becoming increasingly less important. It used to be the #1 trading partner. Now it appears to be number 3. It might even be behind Japan. So it's China, Japan, and then the United States is Korea's major trading partners. But despite this, President Roh Moo-hyun's paramount priority in 2006 and 2007 is an FTA with the U.S. And my guess is this is where the alliance is moving, in a way to sort of equalize the partnership. And regarding Kaesong, yeah, my sense is this will be a last-minute pitched battle between the U.S. and the Korean negotiators. But since Trade Promotion Authority Fast Track expires next summer, 2007, this could be the last FTA the U.S. signs for a long, long time. So it has a lot of significance well beyond the U.S.-Korean relationship.
One more fact I like to add. U.S. has about 15 FTAs with other countries, including NAFTA. But if Korea, U.S. have FTA next year, Korea will be the largest single individual economy which USA has FTA with. Mexico is a little bit smaller than Korean economy, so Korea should be the largest FTA economy in the world.
Thanks. We're going to open it up for 10 or 15 minutes of public question. Let me ask the first one. Councilor Lee, as I always remind my students, politics and economics can't be separated. They always go hand in hand. You and I discussed this briefly over lunch, but I'm wondering if you'd address for the audience here the question of anti-American sentiment in Korea and how that's likely to affect the Korean domestic analysis of the FTA. Will that affect whether the FTA can in fact be approved in Korea?
Yeah, that's a very good question, first of all, and very sensitive question, too. Excuse me. Yeah, economic issue cannot be separated from political relationship. And, you know, anti-American sentiment in Korea has dates back to many, many years. You mentioned that you arrived in Gimpo Airport in spring of 1980. And 1980, you know, incident was one of the, people say, one of the sources of anti-American sentiment. But also we can recollect tragic accident which took place 3-4 years ago. American troop armored vehicle ran over two Korean middle school girls. That was the high time the anti-American sentiment reached the peak point. And now, recently, as Mr. Flake and also Dr. Peters mentioned in their presentation, regarding North Korean policy, current South Korean administration and Bush administration seem to have a different opinion on that. In the past, of course, we didn't have very different opinion on North Korea. And not only on North Korea, on any other topics in the world. This is my personal opinion, but if I boldly express that, the only problem we have now between our two countries that we used to have no different opinions in the past. Things was so uniform in the past, so we didn't have courage to express our own opinion to the U.S. But generation changed, and especially young generation, they like to express themselves. And the current Korean government, which had strong support from young generation, also has it feels obligation to express itself. And to outsiders, or journalists, it seems like we have some very deep discrepancy between our two countries, but I don't think it's the situation. And Korean society very well. And in the past, the family, wife and husband relationship is so, one-sided. When husband says something, wife has to follow. That kind of situation. And after raising all their children, wife now comes up and say her own opinion. And to outsiders, he might say that it's a symptom of breaking up of the family, but it's not the case. In some sense, it's more healthy family relationship is forming. And in the same vein, to outsiders, Korean government and U.S. administration seem to have some deep gap in opinions and on point of North Korea and also other international topics. Thing is not that it doesn't appear it is not so. And thing is, as I mentioned last year, two presidents met in Kyong-yul and agreed upon every point And for the last 1.5 years, we successfully resolved all the pending issues, including realignment and military burden sharing of military expenditure, and also they decided to launch ministerial level strategic dialogue between our two countries. And last January, two foreign ministers met in Washington, D.C. to talk about, wide range of issues, including, expanding a democracy to the third countries and cooperation in the assistance for natural disasters in other areas and such. So when we look deep into the relationship, things are getting a lot better. But superficial observance, superficial look, seem to be what Mr. Flake and Dr. Peterson described. And regarding the FTA business, of course, anti-American sentiment played a little bit in this business too. For example, last January, we decided to reduce the screen quota. Do you know what screen quota is? According to the local regulation, every movie house has to show domestic films for a fixed period of days. For example, 146 days out of 355. And that regulation has been changed, and the movie house now can play Korean movies on screen only 73 days from July this year. And there was a bilateral pending issue. And of course, to launch our big-scale FTA business, we understood that we better resolve those pending issues in advance, including screen quota. And surrounding those decisions and regulation change, movie industry people came up and also made a huge demonstration on the street, and they are pointing out that Korean government was forced to reduce the screen quotas to do FTA, but that's not the case. Thing is, anti-FTA or anti-globalization people have a big voice, and people who benefit from globalization or free trade tend to have small voice, and we have to face the fact, but we have to mobilize those pro-globalization people and also free traders to speak up in the process of persuading the general public, and we have to manage that situation too. But anti-American sentiment after that tragic accident 2-3 years ago, it's now subsided, but it's not on the surface. And but when we appeared to be forced by the U.S. to surrender some strategic or very sensitive national interest, then of course that kind of sentiment might come up again. We have to be very careful about that and be aware, and we should be prepared to tackle that issue too.
Thank you. Nice answer. Let's take some questions from the audience.
In regards to Korean economies, I've read a couple things in newspapers recently among them that the average North Korean makes approximately some chunwon a month, and some chunwon, yeah. The average North Korean makes about that much a month, and in addition, in case of if reunification took place between the Koreas, that it would be 12 times the amount of East and West Germany reunifying. And so I guess my question for you would be, in the case of the Kim regime falling, what kind of position would North Korea have in a combined Korean economy?
What kind of North Korean?
What role would they play? Would it be a manufacturing center? Was that where Samsung and everyone would move their plants to? What would happen, ideally?
Ideally.
Ideally.
Well, that's also a very good question and difficult question to answer. And as far as I understand, Korean government is not fully prepared to face that kind of abrupt collapse of North Korean regime or tragic collapse situation. And of course, East and West Germany case was not that abrupt collapse, but it had very negative and very costly consequences to the Western Germany. And we, if possible, as much as possible, we try to avoid the same kind of situation in the Korean Peninsula. And that's why we try to, number one, persuade North Korean regime to open up as much as possible and as fast as possible. And number two, we try to assist North Korean economy to develop gradually, and we try to be of service, of course, to North Korean economy to be developed in that direction. So we were talking about Kaesong, and Kaesong is, kind of about 30, 40 kilometers north from DMZ area. 30, 40, that's correct? 60 kilometers? You know better than I do. Well, and it's very close, and that is not the only one in North Korean territory. We are developing industrial site together with North Korean government. There are a couple of other areas too in Najin, Sunbong, and other areas too. And gradually, we try to introduce market element or capitalistic element into the realm of North Korean territory. And so far, North Korean government has been very cooperating. But after the BDA case, Banco Delta Asia case broke out, and also six-party talks, dragging and things like that. Recently, the active exchanging relationship has been a little bit slowing down. But my answer is that we absolutely don't want that abrupt collapse of North Korean regime, and to avoid that kind of tragic situation, we are doing something, as I enumerated. Does that answer your question? This is my first time to talk from one-man panel.
Small panel.
Okay, I had a question. It's not necessarily North Korean relations, but the South Korean economy currently the exchange rate is about 971 to the dollar, and I was wondering if what you predict, maybe how far down it will go, or maybe when it will start rising again.
Yeah, that's a very expert question. You are studying economics?
Well, business. Yes.
Yeah, very good. Current exchange rate is how much? Actually, I didn't know that.
I believe it's 970.
970.
Yes.
Well, in the past, Korean government set the level of exchange rate as kind of policy guideline. We don't do that anymore. Market, exchange rate is 100% and absolutely is decided in the market, exchange market. But as far as Korean small and medium-sized enterprises are concerned, they like the exchange rate go up as much as it can, of course. In the past, up until 2 years ago, it was like 1,300 won for a dollar. But now abruptly, for the last 1.5 years, Korean currency was devaluated. Appreciated by about 30%. And the government did not intervene the adjusting process at all. And we are not doing that, and we will not do that. Recently, Senator Grassley, Baucus, and also Senator Schumer and Graham introduced new bills. Schumer and Graham introduced bills last year, but day before yesterday, Senator Grassley and Senator Baucus introduced new bill to pursue Chinese yen appreciation as fast as possible. China is believed to be, very actively engaging, actively intervening the market, exchange rate fixing procedure. They are buying a lot of dollars. Their foreign reserve, which is mostly U.S. dollars, exceeds 800 billion U.S. dollars, and they are still buying them. So that keeping the renminbi exchange rate at about $1 versus 8.28 yuan. But that's China's case. But in case of Korea, we are not doing that. So how much is the appropriate level of exchange rate? I don't know. Or only market knows.
Well, actually, I want to just make a small little comment for your question. I worked at a Bank of Korea for 1 year, like several years ago. At the time, I was in the foreign currency indicator department, and they just kind of give me some information about it. Like, we don't control it. They don't do that. However, we have some small indicators, certain things, and they set up some kind of rules or some policies about that. So even though like Mr. Lee says that we don't do that, but like any other governments in the world, they have some kind of indicators, so they kind of be cautious about it, and we do have it. So if it goes really down or really higher, we do something about that, but otherwise we don't do that. That's the kind of small comment that I wanted to have for you.
Okay. Yeah, that's true. That is called fine-tuning. Every country does fine-tuning, but currency market intervention is different thing.
Did you have a question?
Starting about in the 1990s, Japan started experiencing a lot of economic decline. What is Korea doing to avoid a similar situation? Because like Japan is just now barely coming out of it, and it's been over 15 years now. And what is Korea doing to continue productivity, but not exceed, not exceed its own capacity like Japan ended up doing in the early 90s.
Yeah, Japan went through 10 years of 0% growth period. Just they were stuck with a zero level growth, mainly in the 1990s. And of course, a lot of debates are going on. Why was that? But as far as my personal opinion goes, they did not renovate the system. Market economy and capitalism, in the context of globalization, requires never-ending and permanent reinvention and innovation and restructuring. So one-time restructuring does not satisfy the whole thing. Innovation for every 30 years does not suffice. Every moment you have to renovate. And that's what we're doing. That's what Korean government is doing, to renovate economy, to restructure the economy, to improve the productivity of the whole system, to improve the productivity of labor, improve the productivity of capital. And so we're doing 2-3 things. Number one, we are introducing, of course, as I explained, since the outbreak of the financial crisis in 1997 in Korea, we have been introducing international high-level standard of economic regulation. And we are trying to abolish and eliminate unnecessary regulation so that we can create a lot better, business-friendly economic environment. That's one thing. Number two, as I explained, we have been developing economy under the principle of, export-driven policy. And we, as a small economy, without any significant natural resources, we have no gas, we have no petroleum, and nothing. So we have to rely on export-driven and external expansion policy. We're doing that. To do so, we are, forging ahead with the DDA negotiations too. We try to open even our sensitive market too, including agricultural sector. And we try to open investment sector too. So that, Korea-US FTA contains everything in it: trade, investment, and improvement of the structure, improvement of the legislature, improvement of the standard. That's what we are doing. And we believe that through those all processes, we have less risk of running to confront that kind of stagnating situation faced by Japan 10 years ago.
Let's jump back to a previous topic. I think, Scott, you had a comment on financial markets.
To quickly answer your question on the FX or the exchange rates, nobody thought that the 970 rate or that range was sustainable, but it has been sustained. So people are at a loss to predict when it's going to, or if it'll correct itself. I've read that a 10 won strengthening of the currency decreases Hyundai and Kia's profits by 4 to 6%. So it really hurts Korean exports. On the other hand, in theory, to reduce the trade balance between the U.S. and Korea, because Korean consumers, in theory, and Korean corporations could buy more in the U.S., and they could also buy a lot more in China. So I would suggest that you'll probably see more Korean capital going into China and into the U.S. Regarding Japan, I think there's, and how Korea has not followed Japan's example. Korea has had 2 years of negative growth in the previous 40. Well, I don't know how many years Japan has had negative growth in the last 15. I think the FTA is one reason, and to push towards liberalization, the Koreans want to use it as a way to liberalize their entire economy, and the U.S. wants to use Korea as a way to use Korea's liberalization, use Korea as a springboard to pushing towards changes in the WTO. And there's some theories in Washington that the U.S. selected Korea as a wake-up call to Japan. Yeah, and finally, Korea really wants to push to become an Asian economic hub, and that's another way they want to compete.
Thank you. I want to thank Mr. Lee and our other panelists for the discussion of economics. And let me tell you where we're headed next.